Will turmoil in Libya spill over into the region? A military mobilisation by warlord Khalifa Haftar to the southwest is raising alarm in neighbouring countries. What's behind this move in a deeply volatile region, and what does it mean for war-torn Libya? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Libya was one of the nations that was part of the so-called Arab Spring. But since the revolution toppled longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, the country has known neither peace nor political stability. Libya is divided between two governments and two prime ministers. The UN-recognised government is based in Tripoli. Its rival administration in the eastern city of Benghazi backs the warlord Khalifa Haftar. His forces have recently mobilised near the border with Algeria, and people in Libya are voicing fears of a return to civil war. So what's next for Libya, and can the divided nation ever be reunited? And what does an increase in tensions mean for the regions? We'll discuss all of this with our panel of guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Forces loyal to Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar are at the border with neighbouring Algeria. This video hasn't been independently verified, but Algeria says it's concerned about military activity in Libya's southwestern Shawarif region. This comes at a time of increased tension across Libya.
If rival militias are not calmed down and they're not satisfied with a conciliatory solution, there'll be other decisions regarding them. What's going on? Every day they cause trouble on the streets. Every day people are terrorised. People's lives are not a game. There will be other measures against them. We'll have to be harsh.
Libya has suffered continuous unrest since the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011 in a NATO-backed uprising. The country has been divided between two competing governments since 2014. The UN-recognised Government of National Unity is headed by Prime Minister Abdelkader Abderrahman. It's based in Tripoli in the west. A rival administration in the east is backed by Haftar. The two administrations compete for power through shifting alliances with armed groups on the ground. In 2019, Haftar's forces launched an assault on Tripoli, but it failed, and the warring sides agreed a ceasefire a year later. But a recent surge in violence underlines the country's instability. Many governments in the region and beyond are deeply concerned about the unrest.
Over the past 2 months, the situation in Libya has deteriorated quite rapidly in terms of political, economic, and security stability. Unilateral acts by Libyan political, military, and security actors have increased tension, further entrenched institutional and political divisions, and complicated efforts for a negotiated solution.
Haftar's forces are backed by Russia, the UAE and Egypt. They're also well-resourced. Most of Libya's oil fields are in the east under Haftar's control. This means the government in Tripoli is cut off from a major source of income. Libyans have suffered years of instability, chaos and competing governments. Now they fear increased tensions could lead to more fighting that may have far-reaching consequences beyond Libya's borders. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this now in detail with our guests who are joining us. In Istanbul, Anas Gomati is the founder and director of the Sadeq Institute, the first public policy think tank in Libya. In Tetuan in northern Morocco, Lahcen Haddad is a strategic affairs analyst and a Moroccan senator. And in Paris, Abdelkader Abderrahman is an independent consultant who focuses on security in North Africa and the Sahel and is co-author of the Politics of Algeria. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us on Inside Story. I'd like to look at the specifics of what's been going on in the southern borders of Libya in a moment. But first, let's just take stock of exactly where we are in Libya. I was in Libya in 2011 when Gaddafi was overthrown and killed. I reported on both those events, and surprises me at the time. I thought it would be quite easy to unite a country that's only a population of 7 million people and is so rich. Yet the country is still completely divided. They've never had elections. And ask why?
Well, I think you're correct. I think many of us made that same assumption in 2011. And I think, there were no bad stories coming out of Libya, but Libya was really a model for the region. It was not just Libya that had gone into revolution, but it was clearly a model for other countries that are also aspiring to transition into their own model, their own democratic model with their own cultural and political baggage. But I think the first 3 years of Libya were not so bad. We did have elections, an 80% turnout in the first elections. We had a parliament, we had an elected government. And then we had this resurgence in 2014 where the country did split, as you mentioned, between East and West, between rival militias. And then it has become this playing field for global competing powers. Libya is kind of this great game. Now, that's been the context over the last 10 years, but we've also seen the UN try to mend those divides. I don't think they've been playing a strong enough role because it's come across two different periods. We had a period of regional intervention where we saw the likes of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, starting to come in and push against or push for warlord Khalifa Haftar to push into Tripoli first in 2014, then again in 2019, but he was joined this time by Russia. And that has created this major geopolitical iron curtain that has now drawn US attention, perhaps too late. But really, Libya today is no longer a question of whether or not the local competing forces can just mend their rifts. And we've seen two attempts at doing that in 2014, 2019, and 2020. But we've also now got to mend the rifts of international players that have transformed Libya into that kind of proxy theater. So there's really the kind of the problems. I mean, 2011, it was a question of what 7 million people in Libya may have thought about the future. Today, those 7 million voices are almost tragically irrelevant to today's events because the real decisions are being made far away from Tripoli and Benghazi.
Lahcen, do you echo that point, criticising perhaps the international community? This was a very important issue, particularly for the EU. I remember Germany was heading a political process. Has much of the international community lost interest in Libya?
Well, I think there has been a lot of interest in Libya, and there has been like different kinds of attempts. I mean, from the United Nations, from European Unions, from also countries in North Africa, in bringing like the different parties together. Morocco has played a very major role in bringing them in Skhirat in Morocco for several times. And there has been agreements and those kinds of agreements signed by the different parties. But when you get to really implementing those kinds of agreements, then there is a problem of when to hold the elections, how to organize that. I mean, the nitty-gritty things, but also the interference of different kinds of players. And I agree that Libya has been now like a stage for proxy wars of influence between different kinds of players interfering in Libya has prevented that kind of bringing together different parties like over what constitutes the future of Libya. So it's very unfortunate that there has been an attempt from different kind of parties to work together to have like a vision of what Libya should be in the future, how to hold the elections, how to get away from the division within Libya. But I think there are internal factors. I mean, people vying for power within Libya, but also I think there are also international influences from different kinds of players. And I think that's the unfortunate thing that is happening over now is that Libya is no longer like only the domestic players that are really like having different kinds of discussions about where to move and how to move, but also like other the forces which use Libya as a gateway to other kinds of influences, whether within North Africa, whether within the Sahel. And we're going to talk about that, but I mean, that's the kind of sad situation about Libya nowadays.
OK, Abdelkader, we say Libya divided into two. That's a bit simplistic, isn't it? There are numerous players in both halves of Libya and all sorts of institutions and figures claiming legitimacy and authority, even though many were never elected and many have got mandates that should have expired.
Indeed, they should have expired ages ago. But yeah, we think of Libya as divided into two different entities. But as you underline, there are militias, there are different players, there are tribes, there are all sorts of people and groups that have different interests in Libya. So this makes it very complicated and complex for Libya to sit around the table and have the talk they all need to have faith and move forward for the country.
OK, Anas, let's move on to the east of Libya and the strong man there, the warlord, some call him, Khalifa Haftar. He would call himself Field Marshal Haftar. He gave himself that title. He says he's head of the Libyan National Army. Now, that's a militia, not a national army, based in the east of the country. Just tell us about him, because in 2019, he marched on Tripoli. He failed. He looked humiliated, and I think even at the time, would you agree, some of his backers were beginning to distance themselves from him. Pick up the story there. What's happened since? There seems to be a resurgence.
I think it's a fascinating story. And I think when you think of Libya's longest standing figures, you don't have to look far. You find Khalifa Haftar has not only been there for the last several years, he's been there for over half a century. He was with Muammar Gaddafi when they overthrew King Idris in 1969, and he has been involved in every single coup attempt or actual coup in Libya since that date, stretching, as I said, over 55 years now. What is so fascinating about Haftar, I think, is that he is just, resolute, he's resilient. Now, when you try to think of his power base, many people will say, well, it's that Libyan National Army, it's that self-styled army that he's created. It's the fact that he's got these relationships with local tribes that your other guest has mentioned. The reality today is that he could not do any of those acts that he has done and this revival game and recycling that he's been able to do, not only for the last 5 years, but for the last 55 years, if it wasn't for the critical international support that he's given. And that's really what counts. Now, number one, he's been given arms in violation of that UN arms embargo that has been there since you were there in 2011, James. Now, number one, that's the real big question. How do you stop someone from fighting when you keep giving them arms and you don't sanction them? Number two,
Anas, you mentioned those. You mentioned, Anas, to interrupt you there, you mentioned that international support. We're not going to be polite here. Call them out. Who are the countries who are supporting Haftar?
Sure. The United Arab Emirates since 2014, Egypt since 2014, Russia since 2015, 16, 17, but really militarily with the Wagner Group mercenaries since 2019. But let me just be even more direct. He doesn't just have those weapons that they were given to him in 2014. He has airstrikes, drone strikes. He might fight to the last military personnel of the LNA, but if he doesn't have them, he'll fight until the last mercenary. Syrian mercenaries, Emirati-trained mercenaries that came from Sudan, Russian mercenaries. The list is endless. I mean, Chadian mercenaries that have come in over the last 2 years. If you're willing to fight, Haftar is willing to pay you, or his backers are willing to pay you. But that's still not enough. Other actors have done that in Libya as well. They've also used mercenaries. They've also got weapons, and they've violated the arms embargo in the west of Libya. What is critical to Haftar's support is that he has the diplomatic shielding, not only from Russia, which has a UN Security Council vote, but if you go back to April 2019, when he launched this offensive, the first UN meeting in Rome, the US threatened to veto any resolution that would criticize or sanction Haftar. This is crazy. We're living in a world now, post-Ukraine, that seems to be there, but Russia and the US don't get along. Why do they get along when it comes to the question of Haftar? Because he still is visited by the US intelligence chief or the CIA chief, Bill Burns, in the last year. He frequently meets with the US ambassador. This is someone that also holds US citizenship after his 20 years in Langley, Virginia, where he also moonlighted as a CIA asset from the late 80s. This is one of the most peculiar individuals in global politics, not only in Libyan politics. But what's so fascinating about him is not only that he's been recycled and reinvented over several decades, but he's also brought two players that don't get along in any playground, the US and Russia. It was Donald Trump that on the 4th of April 2019 gave the green light to Haftar to attack when he was using Russian mercenaries in the east of Libya. That sounds a little bit like hypocrisy to me, because this is really not just a question of Libya. It's a study in Western contradiction. We often hear today about the war in Gaza and how that's a study in contradictions, because the Russians are invading Ukraine. They're the aggressor. When Israel invades Gaza, it's defending itself. But you never see the US and Russia on the same table or in the same playbook, or actually backing the same individual, albeit in different ways. But Haftar is that guy. And I think long after history has been written, people are going to scratch their heads to make sense of that.
Abdelkader, we'll talk about Libya's neighbouring countries, but Haftar's influence at the moment extends beyond the immediate neighbourhood. Wide claims, many places, that Haftar's been supplying weapons and fuel to the rapid support forces in Sudan's civil war.
Yeah, the news on that one. Haftar is, in my view, very much unpredictable. This is someone who has been, as it has been underlined by our guests, supported by different actors such as Russia, the USA, the UAE, and Egypt. But more than that, he's very unpredictable, and I don't think that Haftar would want to, or would want to have a national vision for his country. I think that he's becoming a danger for the whole region. You mentioned Sudan, but we can also mention Chad, and we can also mention Niger, Mali, or Algeria. So in that sense, I think that Haftar is someone who's getting too much support, far more support than he deserves, and with the consequences that we have yet to see for the entire region.
Lahcen, let's talk particularly, we talked about countries that are friendly with Haftar, supporting Haftar, allied with Haftar, but let's talk particularly about Russia and what was called the Wagner Group, now sort of more under Russian control. I see reports of thousands of tons of military equipment being shipped by Russia from Tartus in Syria to the Libyan port of Tobruk, including armoured personnel carriers, artillery and rocket launchers. What do you think Russia is wanting to do here? Is it to play a major role in Libya, or is it to play a major role beyond Libya, going further south into Africa?
Well, I think Russia has as objective, I mean, both in the sense that Russia wants to have a foothold in Libya, and we know that Muammar Gaddafi has has historical relations with Russia, where it was provided, Libya was provided with armament from Russia and all of that. And so Russia was very, was not happy with the fact that it was going to lose Libya after Muammar Gaddafi is gone. But I mean, on the other hand, I think that Haftar would play a very important role in opening, if you like, a corridor from southwest Libya all the way to the Gulf of Guinea, in the sense that it involves countries like Mali and Niger, and then go all the way to the Gulf of Guinea. And that's very important for Russia, in the sense that the Wagner Group and the military support that it gives to different kinds of countries is one way for Russia to have very important influence, especially at a moment when traditional powers that have been very influential in the Sahel region, like France, have been seeing, different kinds of problems, especially in Burkina Faso, in Mali and Niger. And I think Russia is moving in with the Wagner Group. I mean, of course, it has had its own problems, like recently in Mali, but Russia is very adamant about the fact that it needs to have real involvement in the Sahel region. It's very important geostrategically for Russia, and the provision of military support, logistical support, material resources, diplomatic cover, and also the existence of the Wagner Group in different places makes this possible. And then Haftar is providing that kind of possibility for Russia to be there, whether it's the interventions in Sudan, in Chad, but also most recently the mobilization across, along the border with Algeria and southwest Libya. And for a lot of people, that's the beginning, if you like, of the opening of that kind of corridor, which is very important for Russian interests and geostrategic interests.
Abdelkader, Lahcen there mentioned that Russia's had some problems. Russia is now directly supporting those countries in the Sahel that had coups and overthrew their previous governments, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. In Mali, at the end of July, there was an attack by Tuareg forces there, a big defeat for Russia. Some reports say 20 Russians killed, 10 Malian soldiers killed. Do you think Russia is asking Haftar to do this because it fears it's in trouble and it needs this resupply route rather urgently?
Well, whether Russia is asking Haftar to do that or not, it's really difficult to say. But for one thing for sure, Haftar getting involved in the Sahel would be a tremendous mistake for the entire region. Having Haftar or any other country, in addition to those that are already involved, such as Russia, involved in Mali or in Niger, would simply destabilize even more those countries than that they are right now. So I don't think that Russia should ever think of getting Haftar involved in this region. We already saw 10 years ago the consequences of the fall of Libya. Or the destabilization of Libya and the consequences in Mali. So having all the forces, such as Haftar's forces, military forces, involved in Mali and perhaps even more in the other neighboring countries, such as Burkina Faso or Niger, would simply further aggravate the current geopolitical and security situation in the country, in the entire Sahel region.
Anas, do you think that Haftar is only in the south of Libya and operating in these new areas because he's helping the Russians, or do you think he sees benefit in it for himself? I've seen some suggestions maybe he wants to seize Kadames, which is that oasis town which is in Libya but close to the border with Algeria and Tunisia, and then maybe a springboard, he's failed in the past, but a springboard then to take Tripoli.
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. I'm not a believer in coincidences. And we've seen this play out before now. Ahead of the war in Sudan, it was Khalifa Haftar who sent his son, Sadeq, to Sudan to whisper in the ear of Hemeti, the head of the RSF, and tell him and warn him that his adversaries were moving against him. That was later revealed a couple of months later. Ahead of this advance and what was happening in Mali very recently, we've seen Haftar send his other son, Saddam, now the head of his own land forces, as an emissary across the Sahel. He was most recently in Burkina Faso, meeting with their new military junta as well. Now, we've seen that play out before. It's no coincidence that what was revealed only in the end of July and what you spoke about earlier on in the show in terms of what was happening with the Russian mercenaries and the 20 or so that were killed, this is most certainly, in my view, securing a land route for their potential retreat out of Mali, but that would also bring up the question of Algeria and its own position there with Mali and with Russia, not only with Haftar, but certainly looking north is what Haftar has done, and there's precedent for that as well. In January and February of 2019, 2 months ahead of his move on Tripoli, Khalifa Haftar moved his forces into Sabha and Ubari, other southern cities that are near the border region with Algeria and Tunisia themselves. So there is historical precedence with this. There was also other coincidences politically playing out in Libya. There was a vote at the High State Council, one of the rival parliaments that sits in the west of Libya. That vote took place only in the last 10 days. That vote was disputed, and there was a potential pretext for a military push and a political change on Tripoli. And I think that's where Haftar is really kind of adept at using this. There are no coincidences. Haftar likes to kill multiple birds with one stone.
OK, Abdelkader, I'd like to bring you in on, we've mentioned Algeria several times. How worried is Algeria? It has about 1,000-kilometre border with Libya. It is one of the strongest militaries in the North African region after Egypt. How worried would they be about events?
Very much worried. Very much worried, very much concerned with what is happening. Let's not forget that Algeria is surrounded by countries with deep instability. We talk about Libya, but also we need to mention, or as we already mentioned, Niger and Mali. So yeah, having troops on its border is something that is of a great concern for Algeria. It's as I said, it's surrounded by other countries. On the west, it's surrounded by organized crime such as drug trafficking. With Mali and Niger, there is organized crime with drug trafficking, with illegal migration. So all this makes the Algeria very worried about what's happening. It has been focused for years now on its southern border with Mali, and to a lesser extent to Niger. But now with Haftar's troops on the border with Algeria, it makes it even more complex and complicated from a security perspective. So yes.
Okay, let me bring in Lahcen now. Everyone here in this discussion has outlined things that sound very worrying for Libya and for the region. Yet, if you were to watch most television news channels, no one is talking about this. What should be the message for the international community, particularly the EU and the US? Should the warning lights now be flashing?
I think the political process needs to go on, and because Haftar's actions have far-reaching implications for regional security, and the presence of foreign powers has turned the conflicts into proxy battlefield. But I think the international community, like the European Union, I think the UN, United States, but I think also with other players like Turkey and the Arab countries, need to push towards like the political process. The political process is something that needs to happen, and I think we need to bring. But also, I think there has been word that Haftar also is concerned about the fact that he's not getting his share of oil. There has been talk that maybe that can happen, and also there are attempts from the government in Western Libya that they are going to have like talks in order to bring in everyone and then respond to different kinds of needs. I think that's very good news in the sense that the political process is still possible and dialogue is still possible. But I think what needs to happen is for the implementation of the political roadmap, because that's the most important thing. I mean, to organize the elections and have a share of power between the different kinds of players.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks to all our guests, Lahcen Haddad, Anas Gomati and Abdelkader Abderrahman. You can see this program again anytime or watch any of our other shows. All of them are available on demand at aljazeera.com. If you have views on the situation in Libya and the wider region, post them on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or on X, the former Twitter, you'll find us at AJ Inside Story. From all of us here in Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha, please stay safe. I'm James Bays, and I'll see you back here very soon. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.